Hello, everyone, and very warm welcome to the Property and Investor Podcast. This is the podcast where I speak to some of the most interesting, inspiring, and resilient people in property investing and beyond. You're in for a treat today. My name is Paul Lanfear. I'm, of course, your host. As ever, at this stage in the podcast, the usual inner lawyer health warning, nothing in the podcast, financial, legal, health advice. Of course, you know that. Do your own due diligence. It is with genuine delight I introduce to the podcast Lisa Richardson, an educator, a leader, a connector, as well as a property investor. Lisa, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Paul, and thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to having this
Yeah,
conversation.
me too. I'm really thrilled that you're doing this. So, obviously, Lisa, you and I have known each other very well. We've known each other for a few years now. So I have the benefit of knowing your origin story, but the good people listening to the podcast don't. So, as you know, the tradition of this series of the podcast, the origin story ones, is to explore people's origin stories, often with an emphasis on resilience, and often, trying to glean the lessons that we can learn. So, over to you. Tell us the origin story. Tell us where you've come from, and then bring us up to the present day.
Okay, well, I'm originally from south of England, so we're getting a kind of geographical take on this.
Mm-hmm.
From Kent, and yeah, I think I could easily say that school was just completely dominated by sport.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sport at school, sport out of school, multiple clubs after school, sometimes even up to 3 clubs. I don't know how my mum basically got me around to all these different clubs and doing all these activities. But yeah, literally, even when my father, because of ill health, was forced to retire early, still just loads of support on keep going with your sport, keep going what you love.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally knew from the age of 9 that what I wanted to do was teach sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so off I went at the end of school to PE college in Bedford. And yeah, trained to be a teacher, and then went out to teach after that time. Yeah, during that time, because tennis is kind of my main sport, so I kind of qualified as a tennis coach as well with a pretty decent qualification. And coached tennis in my holidays. So yeah, I'd had some kind of, your normal pub jobs, and I worked at a printers actually. Wonder why I was so slow when I worked at this printers, because these ladies there were just like just so quick. But actually, yeah, those jobs weren't necessarily doing anything for me. So yeah, tennis coaching where it was at. Taught a bit, literally within a year was thinking, well, why aren't I head of department? I mean, looking back on it now, it was so kind of, I don't know, I must be so arrogant then to be thinking, I'm going to be a head of department within a year. I was even applying for head of department jobs. And I even got a few interviews and I wasn't getting the jobs. And my sister at that point said to me, well, why don't you apply for the army? Because if you apply for the army, they tell you, what's wrong with you and why you're not going to get in. And I thought, that sounds like a good idea. That's a great plan. I'll do that. So yeah, so I applied for the army with knowing really nothing about the army, with the whole idea of I'm going to get this letter and it's going to really educate me and tell me why I'm just not progressing where I want to go in education. This is all still within my first 12 months of teaching. Um, and anyway, ultimately, I ended up being accepted by the army. And so, and I just thought, wow, yeah, it's different. It sounds like an adventure. Let's go for it. So after 18 months of teaching, I left and yeah, went off to Sandhurst. And so that was pretty, yeah, that was a very different type of learning experience. Let's put it that way. I suppose one thing you really learn in the army is that when you're told that something is wrong and you're part of that wrong thing, you accept it. You don't, you just get on with it. Yeah, you get on with it. Probably been more exhausted than I've ever been while I was in the army.
Okay.
Literally, I remember the first time you were allowed out of Sandhurst after about 6 weeks. Literally getting about 5 miles down the road and having to park up and just sleep in the car because there was actually no way I could actually drive home feeling the way that I was feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I stayed in the army for about 4.5 years, quite a few different postings. I literally went from Sandhurst out to Belize, which
Mhm.
was to join an infantry battalion, which was pretty amazing actually. Um, so that was again a very different experience. Yeah, things like kind of hosting journalists in the jungle for their kind of experience of the British Army in Belize and things. Did a tour in Northern Ireland, tour in Germany, and then came back to do actually kind of a, it was called a schools liaison officer. So it was actually interviewing and going into schools for young people wanting to come into the army as an officer.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was my 4.5 years there.
And
And
so,
then
yeah, just pausing there for breath then. So obviously you're obviously really keen on sport. And did that come from your parents, or was that just something that was just came up in Lisa like organically?
no, both parents were really keen on sport. My father did have, a lot of ill health that came from war injuries,
Okay.
and my mum, I suppose, yeah, didn't necessarily have the time in the household because of everything that was going on to pursue sport herself. But she, yeah, both were enormously supportive of me doing any sport. Literally were my taxi a lot of the time. I mean, I
Oh,
literally used to spend my whole summer holiday playing tennis tournaments, just week after week after week.
amazing.
Um,
And do you think that the fitness levels that you had going into the army helped, or was it just a different level of physical endurance that was required? Did the baseline tennis fitness help in any way, do you think?
um, well, the fitness did help. I never really, because I was never really a runner.
Okay.
I've never really enjoyed just running. And so, yeah, I didn't think necessarily, because the army, a lot of it is based on a running fitness
Mhm.
and or carrying a pack and going a long way. And I suppose I never really felt that I was fit in that kind of way. But I suppose when I joined up, I realized that actually my fitness was, was never going to be a problem
Mhm.
because I just had that base level of fitness.
Mhm.
So, and I then did actually get quite a lot out of my own playing of sport in the army. So I played tennis for the army.
Mhm.
Um, so had some quite cool experiences of yeah, tennis tours to Berlin and going on that train that would go across Eastern Germany where you're literally locked into the train from the outside. Tennis tour to Washington, played at Wimbledon in inter-services championships. Actually, one year won the Army tennis championships.
Oh, very
So
congratulations.
yeah, yeah, I did quite a lot of sport. I did quite a lot of escaping from my job actually and playing sport in the army, which was yeah a cause of either no mostly amusement actually.
Good.
That is she going to be at her desk? Yeah.
And when you were on deployment, what kind of roles did you fulfill in your time in the army? What did it look like being on deployment for you?
Um, it was part of being in a well, there were different roles, I suppose. At the time, there was something called the Women's Royal Army Corps, which is what I
Mm.
joined, and that doesn't exist anymore.
Mhm.
And if you were in the Women's Royal Army Corps, WRAC, you basically got attached to some other battalion or corps. So
Mhm.
as I say, first of all, it was an infantry battalion, and so it was literally myself and about 600 guys. So that was something to navigate in itself, actually.
Mhm.
And yes, and I was in the headquarters. So it was a admin type job, I suppose, assisting the adjutant.
Mhm.
My job was called assistant adjutant. And it was things like, dealing with the press. It was picking up on all those. Oh, I also did, I was like a defending officer for soldiers at tribunals.
Mhm.
So yeah, I did their pleas of mitigation. I mean, I did some training with somebody, another officer before I
Yeah.
started off doing that. So yeah, I did a tribunal at the Maze actually in Northern Ireland.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, so that, again, that was a really interesting experience doing that and being involved in that side of things.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and from there I went to Germany, but then I was in charge, or looking, not in charge really, because I was looking after 60 servicewomen.
Mhm.
British headquarters of the Army of the Rhine is where I was in Rheindahlem, and it's just this enormous building with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of offices, staffed by officers from lots of different countries, but also by a lot of service women. So I was looking after them as far as their postings, their welfare, their administration, I suppose. And I
Mhm.
was playing quite a bit of tennis as well, and going skiing. And yeah. And then from there, I came back to Colchester to do my services liaison officer job. So it was kind of a whole mixture of things, really. So I
Yeah.
suppose being flexible, being adaptable,
Yeah.
and willing to learn. And yeah.
And you have very helpfully answered my next question, which is when I was doing like that, doing research and putting the podcast together, I came across the Women's Royal Army Corps, and obviously I unfortunately never heard of that. So you have very elegantly explained what that means, and I'm pleased we dealt with that. So I want to move on to the chronology, but I suppose a question that would naturally arise here is like, what did you learn? So as a woman in the army with all these different deployments, if there was one thing that you could think back to and think, well, what did I learn from my time in the army? What would it be?
Being adaptable, certainly. Being adaptable as to your situation and the balancing act, particularly quite often when you're the only woman in an environment, or an
Mhm.
environment is heavily male with just a few women, is navigating that situation, the balancing act.
Mhm.
Diplomacy,
Mhm.
definitely diplomacy. Um, Preparation, I suppose.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And I suppose, I mean, property is probably less so than it once was, but it is undoubtedly like a male heavy profession, isn't it? And I mean,
Yeah.
so I suppose would you have any words of wisdom in that respect of what would be a useful tool or model or kind of, I suppose, hack um to navigate like a heavily male dominated environment? Is there anything that you could think of, let's say you were speaking to your daughter, like what would be like a guiding light or guiding principle that you could offer there?
Um, is it a guiding principle? I'm not really sure. I just always, so the first thing that happened to me when I got to Belize, um, so arrived at Belize, brand new to the army, um, and the commanding officer, and really felt I still didn't know a lot about, from a practical sense, what was going on in the army. Unfortunately, the commanding officer took me to one side immediately. Yeah, I need a meeting with you. I'm going to explain to you exactly what this battalion is about. And then the last thing he said to me was, if you go out with any of the officers here, I will have you shipped out of here. Um, because he knew that that was not going to work well.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I think it was all about getting on with everybody, building relationships with everybody, and yeah. And actually, I think men quite often make that really easy anyway, because they don't operate in so many in the cliques that women sometimes can.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, building good relationships with everybody, I think, and treading, and just realizing sometimes you are treading a bit of a tightrope,
Hmm.
and but just to, yeah, keep on and pursue what you know in the end is right and the right path.
Hmm. Perfect.
Mm,
So the time came when you left the army. What happened next?
yes. I left the army and I went and did some traveling, actually.
Okay.
So it was a good time for my sister, and off we went for a little trot around the world. So yeah, Southeast Asia and Australia, New Zealand, and yeah, she stayed out there. I came back. I then spent 6 months in Portugal, um, where I was, yeah, did some tennis coaching, taught some English. At some
Mhm.
point, I'd done a TEFL course.
Yeah.
I can't even remember
Mhm.
when that was now, but yeah, I'd done a TEFL course. So thought, well, now's the time. I'll try my hand at a bit of teaching English. Just happened to walk along to the British Council, and someone had resigned or walked off the day before, so that was kind of just fortunate, really.
Yeah.
Sometimes timing and opportunity just happens to fit.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I then came back to the UK. Was thinking, oh, what am I going to do now? And for some bizarre reason, I ended up in Aberystwyth at the university there,
Okay.
working in their sports department, organising their courses. I suppose I was in between teaching and the fact that I'd done this organising and administration in the army.
Hmm.
And then I thought, oh, it'd be quite nice to do a master's degree as well. So then I embarked on doing a master's degree as well. So yeah, so that took me to there. I was there for about a year, and then I left to get married.
Okay.
And I left to get married because the guy I was marrying, he was about to be posted to. He was in the army, and he was about to be posted to Gibraltar.
Hmm.
So I got married, and off I went to Gibraltar. Where I was it was very different because I was an army wife and I didn't have a job, and this is kind of slightly bizarre, surreal experience. But fortunately, there was lots to do as far as traveling was concerned. Being out in Gibraltar, there was um, lots of sport to be played, lots of new people to meet. Um, so yeah, had a really good time in Gibraltar.
Cool.
And yeah, I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, and then at the end of Gibraltar, I did think, oh, I think I feel like I could teach again now. I've
Okay.
had quite a bit of time not teaching, so I think I can. And then I did get that head of department job.
And you didn't, or you did?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
congratulations.
yeah.
So
So
at that point, that goal, that ambition had finally been fulfilled after all of those years.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was just very, very strange. Anyway, so yeah, no, I ended up. We came back to live in Wimbledon, got a job
Okay.
in Guildford, and yeah, there I am, head of department in a girls' independent school in Guildford,
Mhm. Yep.
and yeah, teaching sport. I don't know, department of about 8 people, I suppose,
Hmm.
and yeah, really enjoyed that experience.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I stayed there for a few years and then had my daughter.
Hmm.
And from there, yeah, from there I was still hadn't quite finished my degree, and because I just hadn't had the time. And so yeah, so left there and decided this year, that the year of my daughter was 0 to 1, that I needed also to finish my degree, which also, because of the research part of it, required me to have a part-time job, really. So then I got a part-time job at Wimbledon High School, which was actually just across the road from us, and finished my degree and looked after my daughter.
Like one of those things is not enough, obviously.
Yeah, I know. Looking at it in retrospect, it does seem quite bizarre, but anyway. But I did manage to finish my degree, so that was a good thing. Because I had to transfer to the University of, I'm not sure it's called the University of Roehampton now, or University of London Roehampton, but anyway, yeah, I had to
Yeah.
do a bit of a transfer. Yeah, from there, then ended up moving up to Lincolnshire because, yeah, I just realised that actually maybe the countryside was going to be a better place to be, bringing up young children. And yeah, my husband at the time had a property up there. So yeah, then it was a move up to the Midlands, and
Hmm.
yeah, and a couple of some supply teaching, and I did get a job in a little prep school which I stayed at for a year.
Hmm.
But then actually I got offered a job at another a bigger prep school where I was taking my daughter to their nursery, and yeah, and then ended up staying there for 21 years.
Wow, that'll do
Yeah.
it. And so
So
where did you stay for 21 years?
so so I was at Witham Hall Prep School,
Cool.
and yeah, started off part time, and then ended up being head of girls' games, then ended up being director of sports, then deputy head, and various other things along the way. And yeah, it was a very ended up being a very, very full-time role. And I had my son while I was up there as well. Then both my children came to the school.
Hmm.
They both left, and I was still there. um, yeah, and really enjoyed it. Really fabulous school, really lovely community,
Hmm.
and yeah. So
Well,
yeah, and then
to stay
sorry.
there to stay there for 21 years and to elevate through, head of well-being, head of sport, and then, overall in a leadership position at the school, you must have loved it. You must have been thriving there, to have put in 21 years.
Yeah, I did. It's a beautiful, beautiful place in itself, and yeah, when you can see something is growing and moving and developing and evolving, not just your department, but the school as a whole.
Hmm.
When I first arrived, the classrooms were all in one long, they called it the train. It was like this just long line of mobile buildings.
Right.
But the development was really significant in the school at the time, as I say, not just within sport, but within the whole school. So you feel like you're with something that's organically growing, and you know, and then if you feel that you've got this really supportive community around you as well,
Hmm.
you know, what's not to like?
Yeah, yeah,
Your
definitely.
kids are happy there as well, and yeah, so yeah, no, I really, really enjoyed being there, and yeah, definitely aspects that, you know, that I miss now.
Yeah,
So, but yeah, no, I did just, you know, as deputy head and director of sport and a form tutor and yeah, head of PSHE. Yeah, I just picked up a lot of jobs
yeah,
as I'd progressed, and my weeks were extraordinarily long. And there's a huge, yeah, emotional side to teaching and doing your job the best you can when you're in that role.
yeah.
And if you haven't got that emotional energy for it anymore, to recognize that, and yeah, which I did,
Hmm.
and just that actually now's the time to change, make a move on. So yeah, I know all the advice seems to be, because then I was looking at property after that, and all the advice seems to be, you know, don't necessarily give up your day job straight away. It was
Hmm.
like I just made that decision. Yeah, I'm going at the end of this term. Um, and that was just the way it was, because you know, I just couldn't see how I could turn up for my days
Hmm.
not feeling emotionally kind of invigorated and energized with all I was doing. That's
Definitely.
just too much when you're teaching.
And I totally relate to it. I mean, that's how I felt about when I left the laws. You know, I probably overstayed it by a year, I reckon, maybe. But when it was time to go, it was definitely time to go. And you know, you probably have heard me say this before, like knowing using the surfing analogy. Obviously, you know, we've got to paddle hard for these waves, but it's equally important to know when to get off the board, you know, before it goes into the beach or into the rocks. And it takes a certain character and fortitude to have that strength of conviction that you did to get off the board at that point. You see it in lots of walks of life where people are, let's be honest, outstaying their welcome a little bit because you know they've lost their love for their occupation, and they, you know, it feels a bit perhaps too scary to do the act of reinvention, which you did. So then talking actually, I do have one question before we move on from the, you know, in this grand, you know, very impressive leadership position that you had, what was the, like, if you could distill again one lesson that you learned from leading all of those people in that institution, what would it be?
Oh, quite a number really.
Hmm.
Listening and making people feel they're supported, I suppose more than anything else, because
Hmm.
I think people in organizations often feel they're not listened to.
Hmm.
They don't necessarily feel that what their concerns are, if they're not the concerns of the leadership, are not, they don't necessarily feel validated for their concern or their worry or their anxiety.
Hmm.
Whereas actually, yes, I did a lot of learning on that. You know, a teacher told me once, and actually she got really flushed as she told me that the list with all the deadlines that was on the board was extraordinarily stressful for her.
Hmm.
And at the time, I remember thinking, well, it's just a list with deadlines, you know, and thinking, how can that be stressful?
Hmm.
But you know, I realized that my attitude was just so different, and it was entirely valid, her anxiety, because you know things like that need to come with something else. You know, they need to come with conversation, communication, and support as to how everybody is going to reach that with the pressures that they've got on at the time.
Hmm.
And even though my attitude might be, I'm going to do my best to reach those deadlines,
Hmm.
you know, because that's all a person can do.
Hmm.
For some people, that could never be their approach, and so you know, there's got to be different approaches to these things.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, listening and supporting and ensuring people felt that their concerns are valid. But I suppose the other side of it is always trying to look at things holistically.
Hmm.
So whether it be the children or staff, the last thing you hear or the last thing you see is very rarely actually what something is or what's happened,
Hmm.
and that there's always a backstory. There's always something else that has provoked this situation. Um, there's always a wider picture and therefore something bigger that needs supporting or something putting around it to get to really help a situation or to
Hmm.
really help a person.
Definitely,
Yeah.
100%. So where do we then go from there? Property investing, and then obviously brings up to the current day as well, because you're doing some really exciting stuff at the moment.
Yeah, so I ended up a couple of years before I left teaching getting divorced as well. So that was another life-changing event. And I
Mhm.
suppose it took me quite a few years to actually get divorced as well. So that was an additional yeah, life event going on. Um, so yeah, I left teaching and at the time knew that I was going to spend the first bit of my time. My mum had been quite ill, and it was during the time of COVID, and she'd been in a hospital. Then the only way the hospital would let her out the hospital was to go into a care home. So
Mhm.
I knew my first thing was going to be she wanted to come out the care home, and that I was going to go and look after her for a couple of months. So yeah, that's where I started. And then from there, I just thought, actually, I'm going to try and do some different things now. And yeah, so I did more education, I property amongst those things. I did a work for the office. I did some work for the Office of National Statistics because it was the census year.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, and started exploring. Well, what am I going to do? Because my idea had been, I want to travel. I just want to move around this world.
Mhm.
And then of course there was COVID, and everything was now on lockdown. So it's like, okay, it's going to be plan B, I think. And then, yeah, I think I realized also that, yeah, maybe that other plan of what I was going to do for what I was going to do rather than traveling, but actually to make sure I was in a good position in my life financially and yeah, stability wise, needed to come first anyway.
Mhm.
Um, so yes, so I embarked and for a couple of years on education, getting property situations sorted out, buying some property, um, trying to get properties over the line, trying to resolve property problems. Yeah, and I suppose I then came to the conclusion that as much as there was lots of positive things about it,
Mhm.
it wasn't necessarily setting me on fire as something that I wanted to be feeling I was doing 100% of every day.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so I started looking at other options, which then I was like, online business, yeah, okay, let's have a look at this route and let's see what I can do. And so, yeah, I don't know how I came up with a kind of partnerships broker connector type role, but again, did some education, looked at all different kinds of things that I could do, and that just came up for me as something that yeah, I kind of thought, well, I think this is a good fit.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of what I'd done, particularly, yeah, in schools, teaching sport, had been about working out how people, situations, support, how that all fits with each other. And, in the face of competition in sport, how you put your team together, how different members of your team interact, and how you adjust to pivot when you're faced with different kinds of situations or different competition.
Mm.
And yeah, I kind of think my brain maybe thinks in mind maps, that kind of
Okay.
way. So yeah, I kind of felt comfortable with that. So I spent all of 2020, 23 really sorting myself out, setting myself up,
Yep.
and into getting to a situation of just making lots of introductions, connecting people. Um, yeah, which is where I am now.
Oh. So if you could express in, let's say, anywhere between 1 and 3 sentences what this um kind of connecting role that you now have is, like, how would you do that in sort of 1 to 3 sentences?
I give people opportunity
Okay.
through the connections that I make, so that they can either talk to more audiences, find funding,
Mhm.
or get on stages.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
Okay.
people can just ask me, and they have, for things that I've just thought, Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But then I kind of think now, actually, but I think I know someone who might know about that, and
Yeah.
therefore I can ask that person. And then so far, I've just managed to find them an introduction.
Oh,
Mm.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And do you mind me asking how is that monetized? I mean, it sounds like a fabulous thing to do, and I've seen it in action already, and the feedback's really been really positive. But how do you make a living from such an occupation as a connector?
Well, of course, at the beginning of the year, I mean, when you've done a job in one school for a long, long time, you do understand. People don't generally tell you, but that's fine by me because I don't need that as a person. But you do feel that you're giving value every day.
Hmm.
You have something to offer.
Hmm.
Um, but when you start something completely new, you you're suddenly aware you're not giving any value. Well, that's what you think in your own head because I started off in January with I think 13 connections on LinkedIn, and I could just about get my name on there. And then by the summer, I'm suddenly realizing actually I know a lot of people now. I can really be helpful to other people.
Hmm.
Um, so um, so yes, I'm literally at the stage now where my model was no upfront costs and a commission on sales.
Hmm.
But now this is evolving into a situation where there's things like referrals, people who see that you could be an introducer for them. So which is good because it was an imbalanced model I feel that I had to start with.
Yeah.
If you're always looking at a back end model, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So move. So that's the here and now. That's really excellent. Lisa, I mean, there are many that you could probably give us that you've already given us so far, but traditionally at this stage in the podcast, I would ask, tell us a life lesson. So, the purpose of obviously, stories are really important. We learn through stories. It's how we've passed on information throughout the generations.
Hmm.
But in this context, the story is the kind of the shortest part. The most important part is the lesson that we can learn from you. So, Lisa, tell us a life lesson, and it can be a good event or a bad event, whatever suits you.
Well, yeah, I mean, life lessons have, I think, probably been ongoing.
Hmm.
But I think certainly leaving education was definitely a real time for life lessons because it was the first time I'd not had an employer.
Yeah,
And I suppose I didn't realize at the time what a culture shock that would be,
yeah.
and how that had given me a routine and tempo in life,
Hmm.
and suddenly that routine and tempo has gone. Um, so yeah, my life lessons. I mean, I would say don't give up. Every
Hmm.
opportunity, go for it. Um, and seize every chance to get see. One thing is for certain:
Hmm.
there's always going to be problems and uncertainty.
Hmm.
So accept that and realize that every time there's problems or uncertainty is an opportunity to get more skills to deal with the problem that you're faced with. And so, be open to learning all the time. Um, because actually that a lot of that is what makes life interesting as well, being curious and being open to learning.
Hmm.
And I suppose the other thing just comes through probably I didn't realize that my sport had given me such a valuable life lesson, well, particularly tennis.
Hmm.
When you spend hours on a tennis court, and sometimes tennis matches are hours,
Yeah.
you have to be both resilient and extraordinarily persistent. And sometimes, perhaps your feeling going in is that you're the underdog,
Hmm.
but the power of being persistent can overcome. And the power of being, mentally focused and unmoving um, can make amazing things happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I suppose I've realized that more recently now without an employer and a school and a community around me.
Yeah.
That kind of being unwavering, and that I played that many tennis matches, and yeah, even when I'm playing just a friendly match, it's just a mindset you can keep coming back to, I suppose, which is very useful.
Perfect. I love it. One of my favorite Steve Jobs videos is a really short video when he's talking about that you've got to be crazy to want to kind of achieve your goals. And the reason he says that is that and you could draw this on a chart that is kind of going horizontal and then suddenly goes vertical at the end. And the reality being that most people give up before the chart goes upwards. And Steve Jobs says it really beautifully. He says, it's because they're not crazy. It's because, they have the good sense to realize, it makes sense to quit at this point. What you highlight there around persistence, I think is a fantastic lesson. Just the ability to keep going, even if it's not really making sense, even if you think this isn't going to work out. Which is why I always advocate people to do things for a minimum of a year, even if in all honesty they hate it. I've done all kinds of interesting things for a year just to see what it feels like. So in my 30s, I decided randomly to take up Thai boxing for a year, and
Wow.
every Friday I was like having people punch me in the face voluntarily, but I think your message about persistence, and particularly I think it's interesting and helpful to add in the context of maybe feeling an underdog as well. I've said in previous podcasts, I actually think it's a secret superpower for people to be underrated or underestimated. And if you throw in a bit of persistence in there as well, I think that is pretty much a superpower. What was interesting as well is to listen, because I've heard it in so many kind of private conversations with entrepreneurs, is when they leave a role, there are two things that they tend to lack, and you have highlighted them in this conversation already, is that, and they often say they didn't realize they'd miss it. One is routine, and the second one is community. I cannot tell you the number of entrepreneurs who in private had said to me when they leave their job, they didn't realize they'd missed the routine, and the loneliness is putting it at its highest, but feeling that departure from having been in a community, which obviously in your role you would have experienced and you would have been responsible for building, wouldn't you?
Yeah, no, it's the feeling of team, I suppose, outside of sport, not to do with sport. Common objective, a common move towards all doing something for the greater good, whatever that goal might be. And just basics like brainstorming, and that kind of thing, that kind of interaction, that would be a daily occurrence. You didn't just have to have a meeting for that to happen. So yeah, that is something that I miss, I suppose. But I've made an effort, and it works really well with what I'm doing now, to belong to lots of networking groups. And I'm at a time where I'm starting to feel easier in those, because relationships are building. And so it's then just finding your new community, and that's bound to take time, because it's not as, obviously you're meeting once every couple of weeks or once every few weeks, and it's not as intense as being with this team of people every day. But yeah, I do still go into school, actually. It's one of my multiple streams of income that I've kept going. So this term I do 1 day a week, and I decided, well, tennis and netball are my main two sports, and if I can go and do 8 hours a week in a particular term, so again, just about 1 day's worth really, or 2 half days. One, it gets me out from behind a screen, so I'm actually active and moving. I'm not losing my skill of teaching. And so I've realized that for the moment, that's the way I'm going. It's not necessarily the way I want to continue to go, but that's where I am at the moment.
Well, I'm a big advocate of resilience in all of its forms, including economic and financial resilience. So as many strings to the bow, as many income streams as possible you're pushing an open door, Lisa. So in terms of health is wealth, tell us anywhere between 1 and 3 things you do on a daily basis that contribute to your well-being.
I I take exercise every day, so I do try, but I have to say the weather at the moment, I'm not a great fan of really bad weather. But normally I do this 15-minute walk. First thing I do when I get up, I do a 15-minute walk.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, my aim would be on a day to either go to the gym, play tennis, do yoga, or have a longer walk.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, taking exercise, quite often I am listening to an audible book.
Mm-hmm.
So I would want to think that for 30 minutes of every day, I'm going to be doing some kind of learning, or I'm going to be doing something for me
Mm-hmm.
mentally as well as physically.
Mm-hmm.
So both sides. And yeah, I meditate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Probably I'd like to do more of that. I could probably only say at the moment that I might do like 12, 15 minutes a day, and kind of one longer one a week. Um, yeah, and at the moment I'm doing a kind of self-talk thing, which is something you listen to for kind of meeting your goals. Well, there's different kind of things that you can select or whatever, but meeting your goals and financial success.
Mm-hmm.
Really, because you realize that if you've worked for an organization and been on a salary, you've never really thought about making money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you've not really thought about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so mentally that's quite a switch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a switch in a lot of different ways, including things I think that can be quite deeply rooted in your subconscious if you're from a family where everyone has also had jobs.
Yeah.
Um, so so yeah, having kind of changing that round to be a kind of core self-belief that that's something that's part of you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so those are my things really.
Perfect. That's excellent. And I'm a big advocate of looking at exploring and even kind of, if necessary, re-engineering your values to make it congruent with what you want to do future-wise. So it's really, really common for people to have negative connotations around wealth, for example, if they were given certain messaging when they grow up. And in order to make progress, we need to like diffuse that a little bit and re-engineer it so that it is important that, if you want to make money, you have to have beliefs, positive beliefs around money. Obviously, it's like all things. It's you
Mm,
want to be fit and healthy. You have to have positive beliefs around that as well. Now, in a minute, I'm going to signpost people to what I hope could be the right directions, and you can let us know where else that they'll go. So, for example, they'll see Lisa Richard, webinar broker, supercharge your growth, amplify success through webinars and partnerships. Before we get there, as I said at the outset of the webinar, we've known each other for years. You've come to the Property Investor Breakfast. You have been part of the inner circle, and then this summer we had the opportunity to go on a retreat together. So, in terms of anybody thinking about coming to a breakfast, inner circle, or indeed the retreat, any thoughts, comments, observations on any of that?
yeah, well, if I start with the breakfasts, probably
Mm-hmm.
not been to as many of the breakfasts, but I found it just a really friendly, welcoming community. Again, people left egos at the door, and that was exactly also what I found in the retreat, which was for me, yeah, it was just an amazingly refreshing weekend. And yeah, having done the inner circle with you, and gone through lots of my property headaches during that time, and kind of appreciating that those go on, and you've just got to keep problem solving on them. Um, yeah, I think in all three areas, that's exactly the same thing. People leave their egos behind. People are mutually supportive of each other, and you realize through conversations that actually everybody has got various difficulties or challenges with their property journey,
Mm-hmm.
whatever those journeys might look like. Um, and it kind of therefore makes you feel not quite so alone. But also people always forthcoming on, words of advice, suggestions, not in a preachy way, but just, well, think about this, and kind of mutual exchanges. So, Yeah, no, I can thoroughly recommend all those three things: the breakfast, the inner circle, which I probably need to do again, and yeah, and the retreat again, which I'd really like to do again. And actually, I'm definitely going to do retreats every year from now, because yeah, it was so invigorating when I got back. I thought, well, I've only been away for 3 days, and yeah, it's just like I feel like I've now got a supercharged. I'm supercharged for what's ahead of me. So yeah, it was fantastic.
Oh, fantastic. And those are my sentiments as well. I mean, I've said this before to people that this summer's retreat totally exceeded my expectations. You know, I was totally blown away by all of you, all the contributions, everything. I mean, you know, yeah, what a fantastic group of human beings, and what a remarkable time we had together. And I think, you know, circling back yet again to one of the points you made, which I believe in so much, is this sense is community. You know, we are, I mean, I do say this, like there's this illusion of separateness. There's this illusion that we're all meant to be doing it all on our own, which in my book is absolute nonsense. You know, we are community creatures, we are tribal creatures, you know, we are, you know, when, you know, there's that African proverb, isn't it? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And I just know that now, and perhaps I didn't know that so much maybe 20 years ago, but now I know that in every fiber of my being, that you have to go with others. You have to be in a community. That is actually what makes it work. Anyway, now then, if people are listening to the podcast and they've resonated with you and they want to learn more, particularly about the way that you connect people, particularly the way that you use webinars and partnerships to kind of amplify the messages that people are already cultivating and perhaps want to make more progress with, where do you want me to send these good people?
To LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me. That's where
Perfect.
online where I am most of the time. Yeah, yeah.
I shall do that. Well,
I've
look,
got
all
one
that
more.
remains.
Paul, can I just say one
Yes,
other thing?
yes, of course you can.
Yeah, there's been a few times, I suppose, in my life. One, I probably about 8 years ago, um, investigated through my sister coming up with. She was doing some looking into family background and
Mhm.
everything like this, and tracing family back many years. And yeah, I recall, and also got some letters about that at the time. And we ended up making contact with a half brother of ours
Okay.
that is 12 years older than me now.
Mhm.
And we'd first heard about this, and it was all very difficult when we were about, I don't know, 20 or something like that.
Mhm.
And at the time, it was just so sensitive. It was like, well, we just obviously can't go there. And, you know, and then it's like 35 years have gone, and you've still not gone there.
Mhm.
And then you have the courage, and I don't even know why I'm saying you have the courage, but you do have the courage. And yeah, you reach out and you meet up, and then you realize, not necessarily for yourself, but you realize for maybe the other person. And my father died 20 years ago now. um what has been missed, because you didn't necessarily face that fear
Mhm.
and do it anyway. And I suppose through this new journey of mine and through that experience, yeah, I really do believe in that saying, face the fear and do it anyway.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you
Yeah.
very much for that, Lisa.
Okay.
You clearly are a woman who has done that persistently throughout your life.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there. Look, thank you very much, Lisa. It's been an absolute pleasure to do the podcast with you. I'm really grateful that we've done this.
Thank you, Paul. It's been really nice having this conversation. Thank you for
Oh,
having me.
lovely. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Property Investor Podcast done and dusted. Please, to discuss anything in this podcast, please come and join me in the next breakfast. The next breakfast is very special. It's the January breakfast, where we look at goals, roadmaps, sort of modeling for the year ahead. I might even throw a few predictions in, who knows. A link will be below. Please come and join me at that. And please do share the podcast. Do subscribe. It makes a huge difference to the podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Keep well and speak soon.